Look up at the night sky, not at a telescope image, not at a simulation, just the sky as it is. Stars scattered across an incomprehensible distance, light traveling millions of years, just to reach your eyes. And at some point, almost without realizing it, most of us ask the same question: who are we? And why are we here? Not as a metaphor, not as philosophy, but literally, where did human beings come from? In the modern world, we like to believe that question has already been answered. We tell ourselves that humanity has moved past myths, past legends, past gods. We say we live in the age of science now, an age of data, evidence, and reason. And for many people, the answer feels settled: evolution, natural selection, random mutation, deep time. A slow, unguided process stretching across billions of years, from simple organisms to complex life to us. It's a powerful explanation, one of the greatest scientific frameworks ever developed. But here's the part we rarely talk about. Despite all our scientific confidence, humanity has never agreed on where we came from. Not really. In 2001, a large survey was conducted in the United States. Over 1,000 Americans were asked a simple question: which explanation best describes your view of human origins? The results were unexpected. Nearly half of those surveyed believed that human beings were created by a higher power in their present form. Another large portion believed that humans evolved over millions of years, but that the process was guided or directed by something beyond nature. Only a small minority believed that humans are purely the result of unguided natural evolution, exactly as described in its strictest interpretation. And a remaining percentage had no clear position at all. This wasn't a fringe group. It wasn't an isolated region. This was a cross-section of modern American society. Now pause for a moment, because this creates an uncomfortable contradiction. We live in one of the most scientifically advanced civilizations in history. We map genomes. We land machines on other planets. We peer back to the first moments of the universe itself. And yet, when asked the most basic question of all, where did we come from? We still don't agree. That alone should make us slow down, not to reject science, not to abandon reason, but to acknowledge something important. If evolution fully answered the question of human origins, why does belief refuse to align with it? Why, after more than a century of scientific progress, does the story still feel incomplete to so many people? This isn't about intelligence, or education, or ignorance. Many of the people who hesitate to accept a purely material origin for humanity are scientists themselves, physicists, biologists, medical researchers, people who understand evolution deeply, and still feel that something doesn't quite fit. Even Charles Darwin himself was cautious. He proposed a mechanism, not a meaning. Evolution explains how traits change, how species adapt, how life diversifies. But it does not tell us why consciousness exists, why moral intuition exists, why human beings uniquely question their own origins. Evolution describes a process. It does not resolve the story. And here's where things get interesting. Because when humans don't feel satisfied by an explanation, they don't just move on. They look elsewhere. They remember. They tell stories. Long before laboratories, satellites, or equations, human civilizations across the world told remarkably similar stories about where humanity came from. Stories separated by oceans, by deserts, by mountains. Stories that developed in cultures that had no contact with one another. And yet, they describe the same sequence, again and again and again. In these stories, humans do not slowly crawl out of nature. They are made, formed, shaped, often from earth, clay, or dust. They are created after the world is prepared, after animals exist, after land and water are separated. They are given intelligence, speech, awareness, and most importantly, they begin close to something higher and then fall away from it. For a long time, modern society dismissed these stories as superstition, primitive attempts to explain the unknown, poetry mistaken for history. But dismissal is not the same as explanation, because ignoring a pattern does not make it disappear. Here's the question we rarely ask. If ancient people were simply inventing stories, why did they invent the same one? Why do civilizations that never met agree on the structure of human origins? Not the names of gods, not the symbols, but the sequence, creation, proximity, separation. Think about that. Different continents, different languages, different environments, and yet, humans are formed from earth. Humans are set apart from animals. Humans are given responsibility. Humans fall from an earlier state. That is not randomness. That is a pattern. Modern science tells us humans appeared relatively late in Earth's history. That much is clear. For billions of years, the planet existed without us. Then suddenly, in geological terms, a species appears with language, abstract thought, symbolic behavior, and a relentless drive to understand the universe itself. A species that doesn't just survive, but asks why it survives. Evolution can describe how brains become larger, how hands become more dexterous, but it does not explain why humans uniquely tell origin stories, or why those stories align across the globe. At some point, we labeled these accounts myth and stopped listening. But what if that was a mistake? What if myths are not false stories, but old ones? Compressed, symbolic, filtered through limited understanding. What if they are not explanations, but memories? Imagine trying to describe modern technology to a Bronze Age civilization. How would you explain satellites or electricity? You wouldn't use equations. You would use metaphors. Light, fire, messengers in the sky. And over generations, those metaphors would harden into stories, not because people were foolish, but because they lacked the language to describe what they witnessed. Now apply that idea in reverse. What if ancient humans were trying to describe something beyond their conceptual limits? Something that didn't fit into their understanding of nature. Something that felt external, intentional, above. This is where modern discomfort begins, because the moment we allow that possibility, we are forced to admit something unsettling. That our ancestors may not have been as ignorant as we assume, and that our certainty may not be as complete as we think. This is not an argument against evolution. Evolution explains biological change. But origin stories are not about biology alone. They are about identity, about where humans believe they belong in the structure of reality. Science tells us what happened after life began, but it does not tell us why humans uniquely, across time and geography, insisted that their origin involved something more. So maybe the real mistake wasn't believing the stories. Maybe it was assuming they were all different. Because when you strip away the symbols, the names, the rituals, a single narrative remains. Humans were not always here. Humans did not begin as they are now. Humans came from something else, something higher, something intentional, and something lost. That doesn't mean the stories are literally true, but it does mean they are collectively pointing in the same direction. And when independent witnesses agree, even imperfectly, we usually pay attention. So perhaps we asked the wrong question, not how life evolved, but why humanity remembers a beginning that science has never fully explained. Why cultures separated by the entire planet tell the same origin story. Why belief persists, even when knowledge advances, because belief is not a weakness, it is a signal. And signals exist for a reason, so before we move forward, before we dismiss ancient voices as fantasy, before we assume we've already solved the mystery, we need to ask one question honestly. Not as scientists, not as skeptics, but as human beings. If evolution explains life, why does it fail to explain belief? And if the stories are wrong, why do they agree? So we asked the wrong question, not how life evolved, but why the stories agree. At first, it feels like coincidence. That's the word we reach for instinctively, coincidence. Because coincidence is comfortable, it lets us move on without asking difficult questions. And for a long time, that's exactly what we did. We treated each ancient origin story as a cultural curiosity, a product of geography, climate, imagination. China had its myths. The Middle East had theirs. Greece told different stories. So did India. So did the Americas, separate, unrelated, closed chapters. But something changes when you stop listening to the details and start listening to the structure. When you stop asking who the gods were and start asking what the stories are actually saying. Because once you do that, the differences begin to fall away. And what remains is not variety, it is repetition. Let's begin in ancient China, one of the oldest continuous civilizations on Earth. For thousands of years, Chinese tradition preserved stories about the beginning of the world. Stories passed down long before written history. They describe a time when heaven and earth were not separate, a state of chaos, undifferentiated, formless. Then comes a great act of separation. The sky is lifted. The earth is pressed downward. Order is imposed. And only after that order exists, human beings appear. Not before. Never before. After the world is ready. Humans in these stories are not animals that evolve upward. They are shaped. Formed deliberately, often from earth, clay, or mud. And they are different. They walk upright. They speak. They reason. They are not just alive. They are aware. And most importantly, they are placed into a world that already exists. Now move west. To the ancient Hebrew tradition, the book of Genesis opens not with humans, but with structure, light and darkness, water and sky, land and sea, plants, animals, and only then, humanity, created last. Formed from dust, given breath, given responsibility, authority over other living things. Again, not gradual emergence, but intentional creation. In this story, humans begin in a place that is not the ordinary world. A garden, ordered, protected. A space close to the divine, and only later do they leave it, or are removed from it. However the story is told, the direction is always the same, from closeness to distance. Now shift again to ancient Greece. Often presented as the birthplace of rational thought, philosophy, logic, early science. And yet even here, the story does not change. According to Greek tradition, humans are shaped from clay, given form by higher beings, given something extra: fire, knowledge, skill, the ability to transform nature. Once again, humans are created after the world exists. Once again, they are not merely animals. They are distinct. India tells a similar story. In ancient texts, humanity emerges after cycles of creation and destruction. The world is reset, reordered, and humans are shaped from the substance of the earth, placed into a prepared environment, entrusted with maintaining balance, living close to divine forces. At least at first, travel even farther, across oceans, to Polynesia, to the Maori people of New Zealand. Their traditions describe a world where sky and earth are once locked together. Darkness, compression, then separation, light enters the world. Life follows, and finally, humans, formed from earth, brought to life, given lineage from higher beings, now cross the Pacific to Central America. The Popol Vuh, the sacred text of the Maya, tells the same story. Multiple attempts at creation, failures, then humans formed from earth, given speech, given memory, given awareness, and placed into a world already shaped for them. Pause here, because this is the moment where coincidence stops being a useful explanation. These cultures did not share language. They did not share borders. They did not share oceans. They did not share time. Some of these stories were developing while others did not yet exist. And yet, they follow the same order. First, a formless or chaotic state. Second, the separation of heaven and earth. Third, the creation of the world and animals. Fourth, the creation of humans. Last. Fifth, humans are different. Sixth, humans are given responsibility. Seventh, humans lose proximity to the divine. That is not creative randomness. That is a template. Let's be clear about what this does not mean. It does not mean all these stories are literally true. It does not mean ancient people were secretly communicating across continents. And it does not mean science is wrong. But it does mean something else. Something far more uncomfortable. It means ancient humans, separated by vast distances, agreed on the shape of their origin, not the symbolism. Not the names, but the structure. If you were inventing a story from nothing, why this order? Why not humans first? Why not humans from light or fire or stone? Why not humans born fully formed from the sky? Why earth? Why clay? Why dust? Earth is humble. Earth is low. Earth is not glorious. And yet nearly every culture insists on it. And then there is the timing. Humans are always late, never the first creation. Never the foundation, always the final addition. As if something had to be prepared before they could arrive. This detail matters more than it seems, because modern science tells us the same thing. The Earth existed for billions of years before humans appeared. Life existed long before us. Complex ecosystems developed long before us. In that sense, the stories are not contradicting science. They are aligning with it. But alignment alone doesn't explain agreement. There is another shared element. Perhaps the most disturbing one. In every version of the story, humans begin close to something higher, closer than they are now, closer than they will ever be again. Sometimes it's a garden. Sometimes it's the sky itself. Sometimes it's direct contact with gods. Sometimes it's a golden age, but the message is consistent. Humanity starts near the source of creation, and then moves away from it, not forward, away. That idea is fundamentally different from modern progress narratives. We tell ourselves that humanity started primitive and moved upward. Ignorant to enlightened, animal to civilized. But the ancient stories tell the opposite. They say humanity started elevated and fell. This isn't just mythology, it's psychology. It reflects how ancient people understood their place in the world. They did not see themselves as improving. They saw themselves as declining, as inheritors of something lost. And this belief was not confined to one culture. It was global. So let's ask the question modern discussions avoid. If these stories were just metaphors, why do the metaphors match? Metaphors are shaped by culture, environment, local experience. A desert culture imagines differently than a forest culture. An island civilization imagines differently than a mountain one. And yet the metaphors converge. Humans are formed, humans are placed, humans are entrusted, humans fall. That is not geography speaking, that is memory, or something very close to it. At this point, many people instinctively retreat. They say, these are just archetypes. Shared patterns of the human mind, universal psychology, Carl Jung's collective unconscious, and perhaps that explanation holds some truth. But even that raises questions. Why would the human mind independently generate the same origin structure everywhere? Why would it insist on humans being created last? Why insist on Earth as the material? Why insist on lost proximity to something higher? Archetypes don't explain specificity. They explain themes. But these stories share sequence, order, logic. And then there is one more pattern, one that is often overlooked. In nearly every tradition, humans are not created to merely exist. They are created to rule, to manage, to name, to cultivate, to maintain order. They are stewards, caretakers, middle figures between nature and something above nature. This is a strange role to invent. If humans saw themselves as animals, why imagine authority over animals? If humans saw themselves as insignificant, why imagine responsibility over the world? The stories do not portray humans as accidents. They portray humans as assignments, and yet, in the same breath, they warn of failure, of overstepping, of forgetting origin, of losing alignment. This tension is universal, power paired with vulnerability, privilege paired with consequence. Now step back. Look at the full picture, not one culture, not one religion, but all of them together. What we see is not a collection of myths. It is a convergence, a global agreement on the outline of human beginnings. Different continents, different gods, same origin. At minimum, this tells us something important. Ancient humans were not merely guessing. They were grappling with the same question we still haven't resolved. Where did we come from? And what are we supposed to be? They answered with stories. We answer with theories, but neither side has closed the case. And that brings us to the next problem, because if these stories are wrong, they are wrong in the same way, and if they are right about something we no longer understand. So the question is no longer whether ancient myths are true or false. The question is why humanity, everywhere, insisted on telling the same story. Because coincidence explains one similarity, not dozens. Not across the entire planet, not across thousands of years. Different continents, different gods, same origin. And once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. In the next part, we're going to ask a question most people avoid. What if the problem isn't that ancient people believed in myths, but that we no longer understand what they were trying to describe? Because sometimes the oldest stories survive not because they are false, but because they refuse to disappear. Up to this point, we've been doing something very specific. We've avoided asking whether the myths are true. Instead, we've asked why they look the same. And now we arrive at a different kind of question, not a historical one, not a religious one, but a conceptual one. What if the problem isn't that ancient people believed in myths? What if the problem is that we've been translating them incorrectly? Modern humans tend to read ancient stories literally. We see gods, clay, heavens, and gardens, and we instinctively categorize them as fiction, symbolic at best, primitive at worst. But this assumes something very important: that ancient people were describing reality in the same way we do. And there's no reason to believe that's true, because description depends on perception, and perception depends on limits. To understand this, we need to step briefly into modern physics. Not equations, not mathematics, just ideas. Ideas that didn't exist for most of human history. One of the most profound discoveries of the last century is that space and time are not separate things. They are one structure, a single fabric. What physicists call space-time. In this framework, space is not a rigid stage where events happen. It can bend, it can stretch, it can curve. Time itself slows down or speeds up depending on motion and gravity. This isn't speculation, it's measured, tested, verified. And when space-time becomes flexible, something strange happens. Distance stops behaving the way we expect. Imagine a simple sheet of paper, 2 points on opposite sides. In flat space, the only way to move between them is to travel across the surface. It takes time, it takes distance. But now, fold the paper, those 2 points touch. Suddenly, distance collapses. What was far becomes near, not by movement, but by structure. This is the basic idea behind curved space. And it leads to a concept physicists take very seriously: wormholes. Paths through space-time that shortcut distance, not by speed, but by dimension. Now pause, because this is where ancient language starts to matter to someone who understands curved space-time. A being that appears suddenly, disappears instantly, or moves impossibly fast is not divine. It's dimensional. But ancient humans didn't have that vocabulary. They didn't have space-time. They didn't have dimensions. They didn't have geometry beyond the visible world. They had stories. So let's simplify the problem, strip it down to something visual, something unavoidable. Imagine a world with only 2 dimensions, flat. No height, no depth, just length and width. Now imagine creatures living in that world. They can move left and right, forward and backward, but nothing else. Now imagine you, a 3-dimensional being, interacting with their world. If you place your finger through their flat plane, what do they see? Not you, not a hand, not a body. They see a circle. A shape that appears from nowhere, moves, changes, then vanishes. From their perspective, that object breaks every rule of reality. It appears without origin, disappears without cause, moves without motion. What would they call you? Not a human, not a scientist, not an engineer. They would call you a god. Because from their dimensional perspective, you are. Now imagine trying to explain yourself to them. You wouldn't talk about height. They don't have that concept. You wouldn't talk about a 3rd dimension. They can't imagine it. So you'd speak in metaphors. You'd use what they know. You'd say, I come from above. I shape your world. I appear and disappear. Now scale that idea up. What if ancient humans were not imagining gods, but encountering phenomena they could not describe? Phenomena that did not behave according to the rules of their perceived reality. This is where the phrase "created from earth" starts to look different. When ancient stories say humans were made from clay or dust, we assume literal dirt, mud, soil. But earth, is also a category. It means the material of this world, the substance of this level of reality. In modern terms, we might say matter, particles, atoms. To a being operating in a higher dimensional framework, everything in our three-dimensional spacetime would appear coarse, dense, low. From their perspective, our entire world could reasonably be described as dust. This is not mystical, it's relative. Think again about dimensions. A three-dimensional object cast into a two-dimensional world appears simplified, reduced, fragmented. Likewise, a higher dimensional action would appear incomplete when viewed from below. Now consider something else. In ancient stories, the gods do not usually enter the world fully. They descend. They appear partially, they manifest, they leave. This matches what dimensional interaction would look like. Not full presence, but projection, intersection. And this might explain something else that has puzzled historians for generations. Why gods are described as human-like, but not quite human. Too tall, too luminous, too powerful, too strange. They eat differently. They move differently. They age differently. Sometimes they don't age at all. This inconsistency makes no sense if gods are imaginary. But it makes perfect sense if gods are translations, not of belief, but of observation. Now let's return to the core phrase that appears across civilizations. Humans were created in the image of higher beings. This has always been treated as symbolic. Moral likeness, spiritual similarity. But imagine it literally. If a higher dimensional being wanted to create a form capable of operating in a lower dimensional space, what would they do? They would design something compatible. Something constrained, something simplified, a projection, not identical, but functional. That would look like creation in the image of something higher, not physically identical, but structurally aligned. Now we can return to the myths without dismissing them, without worshiping them, without literalizing them. They become descriptions of interaction across limits. Stories told by people who lacked language for what they experienced. This doesn't require belief. It requires humility. Modern science itself acknowledges that we perceive only a fraction of reality. We see a narrow band of light. We feel a limited range of forces. We experience 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time. And even that might not be complete. Theories like string theory suggest additional dimensions that are compact, hidden, or inaccessible. Not because they don't exist, but because we can't interact with them. If that's true, then our experience of reality is partial, just like the 2-dimensional beings on the flat plane. And now consider this. If we encountered a higher dimensional intelligence today, how would we describe it? We wouldn't call it a god. We'd call it an advanced intelligence. A non-human entity, an interdimensional being, different words. Same problem. Language follows understanding, not the other way around. Ancient people were not stupid. They were limited. Limited by perception, limited by language, limited by conceptual tools. And when something breaks your model of reality, you don't ignore it, you mythologize it. This reframes everything. The myths don't have to be lies. They don't have to be literal. They don't even have to be correct. They just have to be sincere attempts to describe something real with insufficient tools. Now we can understand why the stories agree. Because the experience was the same, only the language differed. A higher dimensional interaction would look identical across cultures, appearing from nowhere, creating order, shaping matter, leaving, different continents, different gods, same experience. This doesn't prove anything, and it doesn't need to. It only opens a door we closed too quickly, when we decided ancient people had nothing to teach us. Because perhaps the greatest mistake modern civilization makes is assuming that knowledge always moves forward. Sometimes it loops, sometimes it forgets. Sometimes it loses context, and sometimes the past isn't wrong. It's incomplete. Ancient people may not have been wrong. They may have been limited. And in the next part, we'll explore the consequences of that limitation. Because if humanity once existed closer to something higher, what does it mean that we no longer do, and what happens when a species forgets where it came from? Up to this point, we've been talking about origins, where humanity might have come from, how ancient stories align, and how myth may be a translation of something real but misunderstood. Now we reach a turning point, not in history, but in the story humanity tells about itself. Because almost every origin story shares something else, something darker, something quieter, a moment where everything changes. In the West, it's called the fall. In the East, it's described differently, but it leads to the same place, a separation. Let's begin where many people in the modern world first encountered this idea. The Garden of Eden. In the biblical story, humanity does not begin in struggle. There's no survival anxiety, no hunger, no fear of death. Adam and Eve live in a space that is ordered, protected, and complete. A garden, not heaven itself, but close to it. A place where the boundary between the human and the divine is thin. They walk freely, they speak freely, they are unashamed. Not because they lack morality, but because they lacked a vision. Then comes the turning point, the tree of knowledge. Often misunderstood, often oversimplified. The story does not say Adam and Eve became evil. It says their eyes were opened. They gained the knowledge of good and evil. This detail matters. Because knowledge is not just information, it's a state. Before eating the fruit, Adam and Eve live in a unified perception. They do not judge. They do not compare. They do not separate the world into opposing categories. Afterward, they do. They see themselves as separate. They recognize nakedness. They experience shame. They hide. This is not the behavior of criminals. It's the behavior of beings who have crossed a threshold. Now look east. In ancient Chinese tradition, the earliest state of the universe is not division. It is unity. Heaven and earth are not separate. They exist together, interwoven, undifferentiated. Only later are they pulled apart. Sky rises, earth sinks. Order emerges, and humanity appears after this separation. Not before. This is a crucial difference and a crucial similarity. In the West, humanity begins close to the divine and then falls away. In the East, humanity emerges only after the separation has already occurred. Different starting points. Same destination. In both traditions, the result is identical. Humans live in a world where heaven and earth are no longer connected, where access is limited, where movement between realms is no longer free. This isn't punishment, it's condition. Now consider what happens next in both traditions. In Eden, God does not destroy humanity. He does not erase them. He clothes them. He protects them. And then, He sends them out, not in anger, but in necessity. Because once Adam and Eve have eaten from the tree of knowledge, they can no longer exist in the same space as before. The text makes this clear. Humanity is expelled so that they do not also eat from the tree of life, so that they do not live forever in a divided state. This is not vengeance. It's containment. Now reinterpret this through a modern lens. What if knowledge of good and evil is not moral awareness, but dual perception? The ability to distinguish, to separate, to categorize. Modern psychology recognizes this shift. Infants experience the world as unified, undivided. Only later do they develop self-awareness, judgment, ego. With that awareness comes suffering, fear, comparison, desire. And with it comes separation from others, from nature, from the present moment. In this sense, Eden is not a location, it's a state. A state humanity can no longer inhabit once perception changes. Now return east again. In Taoist thought, the original state of the universe is harmony, balance, no opposition, no conflict. Only when distinctions arise, yin and yang, light and dark, heaven and earth, does complexity emerge, and with it, instability. Humanity lives inside that instability. Now step back. Look at both traditions side by side. In both, humanity loses access to an earlier state of unity. In both, that loss is irreversible. And in both, it is not described as cruelty. It is described as consequence. This distinction is important, because punishment implies intent to harm. Separation implies incompatibility. A fish removed from water is not punished. It simply cannot survive. Now think again about dimensional limits. If humanity once existed in a state closer to a higher order, a unified perception, then gaining a lower, divided perception, would make coexistence impossible. Not morally impossible, structurally impossible. This reframes the fall entirely. Humans were not expelled because they disobeyed. They were expelled because they changed. They crossed a boundary. And once crossed, there was no going back. This explains another detail that often confuses readers of Genesis: why the entrance to Eden is guarded, why access is blocked, why it cannot be re-entered. Not because God is cruel, but because Eden no longer matches human perception. Now look again at ancient Chinese myth. After heaven and earth separate, there's no path back, no ladder, no return. Human beings are born into the lower world, and that is where they remain. In both traditions, the barrier is not enforced by violence, it is enforced by reality. This brings us to the most unsettling interpretation. What if the fall represents a descent in consciousness? Not a fall from grace, but a fall in awareness, from unity to duality, from direct knowing to symbolic thinking, from being to believing. This would explain why ancient cultures speak of a golden age, a time when humans lived longer, understood more, felt closer to something higher, and why every subsequent age is described as decline. This is not nostalgia, it's pattern recognition. If humanity once operated in a higher perceptual state, then the modern world represents not progress, but distance. Distance from origin, distance from source, distance from coherence. This does not mean modern humans are worse. It means we are different. We build technology, we manipulate matter, we conquer nature. But we struggle with meaning, with unity, with purpose. Ancient myths understood this trade-off intuitively. Knowledge gave us power, but it cost us belonging. This is the true cost of the fall. Not death, not labor, not suffering, but separation. Separation from nature, separation from the divine, separation from ourselves, And once separation occurs, systems emerge to manage it. Religion, law, morality, structure. Attempts to restore order in a divided world. This is why Eden cannot be revisited physically, because Eden is not behind us, it is above us. Not spatially, but perceptually. And that brings us back to the East one final time. In many Eastern traditions, enlightenment is described as a return, not forward, but back, a return to unity, to harmony, to non-duality, not by disobeying reality, but by transcending limited perception. This is why both East and West agree on one thing. Humanity cannot return to the original state by force. It requires transformation. And until that transformation occurs, humanity remains here, in the lower world, the material world, the divided world. So when ancient stories describe humanity being cast out, they are not describing a sentence. They are describing a condition, not punishment, but separation. And in the next part, we'll explore what happens after separation, when humanity forgets its origin entirely, and the consequences that follow. Because separation is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of something far more dangerous. At some point, every civilization tells the same story. Not about how it began, but about how it almost ended. Fire destroys cities. War wipes out nations. Disease reshapes societies. But across cultures, across continents, across time, there is one catastrophe that stands apart. Water, not a local flood. Not a seasonal disaster, but a flood so vast. It erases memory itself. In the Bible, it's the story of Noah. In ancient Greece, it's Deucalion. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim. In China, the Great Flood controlled by Yu the Great. In Central America, a world destroyed before the present age of humanity. Different names, different settings, same event. A world overwhelmed. A civilization erased, a reset. These stories are often dismissed as exaggeration, ancient fear, symbolic morality tales. But once again, the problem isn't the details, it's the pattern. Why does nearly every early civilization remember a flood? Not a firestorm, not an earthquake, not an asteroid, but water. And why does that flood always come? After humanity has grown advanced? In these stories, humans are not primitive when the flood arrives. They have cities, they farm, they build, they trade. They have social order, and then they are gone. In the biblical account, the flood is framed as judgment. But look closer. God doesn't wipe out everything. He preserves a sample. Life is not ended, it is restarted. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods regret their decision. They realize the destruction was excessive. Again, not annihilation, reset. In Greek myth, Zeus floods the world to cleanse it. Only a pair survives. They repopulate the earth. In Chinese tradition, the flood is not moral, it is cosmic, chaos overwhelming order. And the task of humanity afterward is not worship, but engineering, control, management. Across cultures, the flood marks a boundary. Before it, there's a world we no longer recognize. After it, history begins again. This is important. Because myths don't remember small things. They remember trauma. Now let's slow down. And be very careful. Modern science does not confirm a single global flood. No serious researcher claims that. And this matters. But modern science does confirm something else. Something quieter, something more unsettling. At the end of the last ice age, around 12,000 years ago, the Earth changed rapidly. Sea levels rose, not slowly, not gently, but in pulses. Massive meltwater releases, sudden surges, coastlines vanished. Entire regions that had been dry land were swallowed by the sea for people living near coasts, rivers, and plains. This would not have felt gradual. It would have felt like the world ending. Now consider something else. Most early civilizations formed near water, rivers, floodplains, coasts, the very places most vulnerable to rapid sea level rise. If advanced human societies existed in those regions, their remains would now be underwater, not destroyed by time, hidden by it. And in the last few decades, something strange has happened. We started looking, sonar mapping, satellite imaging, underwater archaeology. And what we found was unexpected. Off the coasts of India, structures beneath the sea, regular shapes, foundations, walls, carbon dated to thousands of years before known civilizations. In the Mediterranean, submerged settlements, stone roads, harbors near Japan, massive underwater formations that appear carved, not natural. Are all of these human-made? Not proven. Are all of them natural? Also not proven. And that uncertainty matters. Then there are the wheel tracks. Grooves carved into solid rock, found in places like Malta. They run across land and continue straight into the sea. Who carved them? Why do they lead underwater? If sea levels were lower when they were made, the answer becomes obvious. But obvious doesn't mean accepted. Now consider one of the strangest discoveries of all. Deep beneath the Earth's surface, far below where liquid water should exist, scientists have detected massive reservoirs of water, not oceans in the usual sense, but mineral-bound water. Trapped within rock, the volume is staggering. Comparable to surface oceans. This doesn't mean the Earth flooded itself. It doesn't mean myths are literal, but it does mean the planet holds far more water than we once believed. Now return to the myths. In many flood stories, the water doesn't come only from rain. It comes from below, the fountains of the deep, the breaking of the earth, the release of chaos. That detail always puzzled scholars, until geology caught up. Once again, myths don't explain mechanisms, they preserve memory. Now here is the uncomfortable part. Every flood story carries the same warning. Humanity had grown powerful, technologically capable, socially complex, but morally or structurally out of balance. The flood is never random. It follows hubris, arrogance, loss of alignment, not necessarily religious sin, but imbalance. And after the flood, something changes. Human lifespans shorten. Knowledge is lost. Structures disappear. Humanity starts again. Simpler, smaller, more cautious. This matches what archaeology shows. A sudden break, a dark age, a reset in complexity. We call it prehistory. But that name may hide more than it reveals. Now shift to the present. For the first time since the Ice Age, humanity again controls the planet. We move rivers, flatten mountains, change the atmosphere, warm the climate. Sea levels are rising again, not mythically, measured. Coastal cities are vulnerable, supply chains are fragile. Systems are interconnected. We tell ourselves this is different, that we're smarter, that we understand the risks. But every civilization before us thought the same. The flood stories are not predictions, they are reminders, they say. Civilization is not permanent, progress is not guaranteed, and memory is fragile. Myths remember what history forgets. Because history is written by survivors, and floods erase survivors. If a civilization falls beneath the sea, it leaves no books, no monuments, no warnings, only stories. Stories passed down by those who came after. Distorted, simplified, mythologized. Not because they were false, but because the truth was too large to preserve intact. And that brings us to the final realization. Civilizations don't end. They reset. They rise. They grow. They disconnect. They collapse. And then, someone else begins again. Standing on the ruins, unaware of what came before. The flood is not the end of the story. It is the transition between chapters. The question is not whether the last reset really happened. The evidence suggests something did. The real question is this: if we are living at the height of another cycle, what comes next? Because myths are not warnings shouted at the future. They are echoes from the past, and echoes only exist if something once made a sound. Every civilization believes one thing, that it is different, more advanced, more informed, more prepared. That whatever destroyed the world before won't happen again, not to us. And for most of history, that belief felt reasonable. Because no civilization before us could see the whole planet. No civilization before us could measure the atmosphere. No civilization before us could predict disasters years in advance. We can. We see storms forming across oceans. We track melting ice from space. We model futures with supercomputers. So the question isn't whether we are smarter, we are. The question is whether intelligence alone has ever been enough. When we look back at ancient civilizations just before they vanished, we see something familiar. They were technologically confident, organized, productive. They believed they had mastered their environment. Controlled water, controlled land, controlled labor. They built monuments meant to last forever. And we stand among their ruins asking the same question every time. How could they not see it coming? Now look around. We live inside systems no single person understands. Technology so complex that even their creators can't fully predict their outcomes. Algorithms that shape attention, markets that shape survival, machines that learn faster than we do. We call this progress, and maybe it is. But progress is not immunity. Every civilization that collapsed thought it was stable, because collapse doesn't announce itself. It feels like momentum. More growth, more efficiency, more speed. Until one day, the system becomes too complex to correct. Ancient myths didn't describe collapse as sudden. They described it as inevitable, not because of punishment, but because of imbalance, too much extraction, too much confidence, too much distance from whatever grounded them. In the myths, the gods don't destroy humanity when it is weak. They intervene when humanity believes it no longer needs alignment. We no longer use the word alignment. We use words like optimization, productivity, scale, but the idea is the same. Ask yourself something uncomfortable. At what point does mastery become arrogance? At what point does understanding become control? And at what point does control become blindness? Ancient civilizations believed the world had order, a balance that could be violated. Modern civilization believes the world is a machine, a system to be optimized. These two worldviews are not compatible. One sees limits, the other sees obstacles. The ancient stories warn that when limits are ignored, the system doesn't argue, it resets. Not out of anger, out of physics. Look at how we talk about nature today. We don't ask what the earth can tolerate. We calculate what we can survive. We don't ask what systems require balance. We ask how much we can extract before consequences arrive. This is not evil, it's efficient. And efficiency has always been the language spoken just before collapse. The civilizations before the flood did not think they were doomed. They thought they were successful. They expanded. They accumulated. They centralized. And then the conditions that allowed that success shifted. When ancient myths speak of people forgetting the gods, they are not talking about religion. They are talking about forgetting limits, forgetting humility, forgetting dependence. In modern terms, we've replaced gods with models, with data, with forecasts, and we trust them completely. But models only work within the conditions they're built for. Every reset in history happens when conditions change faster than models can adapt. Ice melts, seas rise, ecosystems shift. Civilizations that can't adjust don't argue with reality. They disappear into it. We often imagine collapse as dramatic: fire, chaos, violence. But most collapses are quiet. Supply chains fail. Trust erodes. Systems become brittle. And then something small pushes them past the edge. The myths describe floods. But floods are just symbols. The real warning is about thresholds. Points beyond which return is no longer possible. Ask yourself another question. If an advanced civilization before us left no trace, how would we know? Would we recognize its ruins? Or would we call them natural formations? Would we believe the stories they left behind, or dismiss them as myths? We assume the past was simple because what remains looks simple. But what survives catastrophe is not complexity. It's fragments, stories, symbols, warnings stripped of context. That's what myths are. Not fairy tales, compressed memory. Now turn the lens forward. We are building systems that outpace human comprehension. Artificial intelligence, synthetic biology, planet-scale engineering. We are crossing thresholds faster than we can study them. Again, this isn't evil, it's momentum. The same momentum every civilization mistakes for destiny. The ancient reset did not erase humanity, it erased certainty. After every collapse, humanity returned smaller, cautious, more aware of limits. Until time passes and memory fades, then the cycle begins again. We are not the first civilization to ask, are we next? We are simply the first to ask it while watching the planet change in real time. And here is the most uncomfortable truth of all. Nothing in history suggests awareness prevents collapse. Awareness changes how collapse is remembered, not whether it happens. Every civilization believed knowledge would save them. None were saved by knowledge alone. So when ancient stories say humanity was created once and reset once, they are not predicting doom. They are describing a pattern: creation, expansion, separation, reset, not because humanity is evil, but because systems drift, and drift eventually exceeds tolerance. The question is not whether our civilization will end. Every civilization does. The question is whether we recognize the moment we're in. Because collapse doesn't begin when the flood arrives. It begins when people stop believing a reset is possible, or worse, when they believe it can't happen to them. If humanity was created once, reset once, what makes us think this time is different? No warning follows, no answer is given, only silence. And silence has always been the space where the next story begins.